War II, when American devastated Japan, not just nuclear strikes, but also the fire bombings.
Yes.
So at the end of World War II, Japan was completely devastated. But in like 20 years' time, in a generation, they became the world's greatest manufacturing power. So I would not count the Japanese out. There's something about their culture that is extremely resilient, extremely entrepreneurial. And I think that given crises, they will come together as a people and adapt to these challenges. And so if I were to bet, if you give me like $1 billion and said, in East Asia, you can invest your money either in China or Japan, or you could invest half and half. Well, Tucker, I'll be honest with you. I would invest all my money in Japan.
أزمة كوريا الجنوبية تعيش وضعاً خطيراً بسبب اقتصاد الاحتكار وانخفاض معدل المواليد، حيث أصبح إنجاب الأطفال مكلفاً للغاية بسبب التنافس الشديد على المناصب النخبوية.
So when you have a monopoly, what you do is you create a hierarchy, right? Because everyone's trying to get into these companies because these companies are the most prestigious in South Korea. And South Korea is very much a Confucian culture where face is everything. So the problem, though, is how do you get into these companies? It's a very prestigious position where everyone's trying to get in, right? And so you usually get in through the college entrance examination, which allows you to get into a prestigious university, right? So if you are a South Korean couple, your strategy is either not to have children because you cannot afford to play this game, because you need to send your kid to cram schools, get the best tutors, basically focus all your resources on ensuring the child does well on the college examination so that he or she can get into Samsung. Or you can choose to have, so you can choose not to have any children because it's too expensive for you. But if you choose to have children, you can only choose to have one kid because it's much more strategic for you to put all your resources into one kid than to spread it over 3 or 4 kids. So that's why economic monopoly would naturally lead to a low birth rate.
4. الهدم الممنهج للغرب. تبديل السكان. ناقشت المقابلة قضية الهجرة الجماعية في كندا وبريطانيا وأوروبا، حيث وصفها جيانغ بأنها هدم محكوم للحضارة الغربية.
It seems as though it's almost a controlled demolition of Western civilization, right? The Anglosphere, Western Europe. It seems as though these nations are being destroyed purposely. For what end? I don't know. But I would just say there's a certain pattern that has emerged, and the result can only end up in the controlled demolition of these societies.
أعداء الكلاسيكيات. أشار جيانغ إلى مفارقة غريبة، فبينما تتخلى جامعات النخبة الأمريكية مثل يال وهارفارد عن دراسة الكتب العظيمة لهوميروس وأفلاطون ودانتي، يقبل الطلاب في الصين على دراستها لإيمانهم بما تحتويه من حقائق أبدية.
You know, unfortunately, I think that if you are educated in America, you know, I went to Yale, and so I know a lot of these Ivy League people.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we've been indoctrinated to believe certain values, and these values are not questionable. So for example, there was a court case that went to the Supreme Court about affirmative action at the University of Michigan, and affirmative action is clearly against American values, against the idea of American meritocracy, right? But the Supreme Court said that affirmative action was good because diversity is an inherent good, okay? And it's interesting because if you go to a place like Yale or Harvard or any of these Ivy League schools, there's actually very little diversity. I'm talking about intellectual diversity.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like there's different skin color, but if you actually look at the ideas that they engage with in a classroom, it's a very conformist setting. So it's one of these great ironies where affirmative action is supposed to bring diversity to the classroom. But if you go to any classroom in an elite setting, it's extremely conformist. You're not allowed to bring up these issues about, you know, population replacement, immigration, because then you'd be called a racist. And that's the worst thing to be called, right? You're better off being called a pedophile.
Yes.
Right? Pedophiles have more rights now than racists. So unfortunately, it's not just what's happening in current events. It's also what's happening in the classroom and in the popular culture where people are not even allowed to ask questions that are like blindly obvious if you just walk the streets of any, Western city.
وضع كندا. يدعي جيانغ أن كندا تعامل كمستعمرة موارد، حيث تقمع الدولة سكانها عبر الهجرة الجماعية وبرامج القتل الرحيم.
Sure, that's a great question. And this is something that I struggle with all the time because I am a Canadian citizen. I went to school there. My answer is that Canada was never really a nation state. It's more of a glorified resource colony for the British, the city of London. And the reality is now that the British are under a lot of strain, the city of London is under a lot of financial pressure. It sees places like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And what do you do if you have financial issues? Well, you do corporate restructuring, right? You change the middle management.
5. دور دونالد ترامب. استعرض جيانغ 4 احتمالات لتورط ترامب في الحرب. 1. أنه ممثل ينفذ نصاً لا يفهمه بالكامل. 2. أن لديه دعوة خلاصية مسيانيك كولينج لإتمام مهمة ما. 3. أنه أجبر على الحرب بسبب تحركات بنيامين نتنياهو. 4. أنه يتعرض للابتزاز أو الاختراق من قبل قوى الظل. الخلاصة: تنتهي المقابلة بتأمل حزين حول فقدان الهوية الثقافية، حيث يؤكد جيانغ أن الأماكن الأكثر عداءً للحضارة الغربية الآن هي الدول الغربية نفسها.
Well, I would say Canada, Britain, Western Europe. I would say these places are the most hostile towards Western civilization. Chinese people have tremendous respect for Western civilization. In fact, in China's, in the process of promoting the classics, Plato, Homer, Shakespeare, in China, because Chinese recognize the tremendous cultural value and immense eternal truths embedded in these classics. So we're in a very weird situation where the West is destroying itself by abandoning what makes it great, which is, these classics.
5. دور دونالد ترامب. استعرض جيانغ 4 احتمالات لتورط ترامب في الحرب. 1. أنه ممثل ينفذ نصاً لا يفهمه بالكامل. 2. أن لديه دعوة خلاصية مسيانيك كولينج لإتمام مهمة ما. 3. أنه أجبر على الحرب بسبب تحركات بنيامين نتنياهو. 4. أنه يتعرض للابتزاز أو الاختراق من قبل قوى الظل.
That's a really hard question to answer. So let's look at different possibilities. Okay. The first possibility is that he's been employed as an actor and he's just following a script, but he doesn't really know where this movie is going. He's just doing his part, but he's manipulated behind the scenes by people around him. And when reporters asked him, like, why is this war in Iran happening? He did say that his advisors, which include Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Peter Hegseth, Marco Rubio, told him that the Iranians were so close to getting a nuclear weapon and that the Iranians were going to attack first. And so I was basically misled. And I think that's probably true in that Trump surrounds himself with certain people that have a certain political eschatological agenda. So that's one possibility, that he's just an actor. Another possibility is that he himself has a messianic calling. Okay. And what I mean by that is, if you go back to January 2021, he was politically dead, right? Because the January 6th riots happened. He was impeached twice. And then after he left office, there was lawfare conducted against him and he went bankrupt. So it was as though the entire world went against him. But now he's president of the United States. And so how would he personally understand this? I think a lot of it is God has asked him to serve. There's a call to serve and he has to fulfill a mission. But what this mission is, whether it's to save Israel, whether it's to save America, whether it's a part of a grander scheme, only he in his heart knows. And I think no one except him knows. Okay. So I think that's another possibility. And the third possibility is that this is all Israel's doing. Netanyahu is the one who's forced him into this sort of situation because the Israelis attacked first. And Marco Rubio said this, where you know what? We wanted these negotiations, but the Israelis were planning to attack. If they attacked, the Iranians would be compelled to attack both the Americans and the Israelis. And we did not want to put our soldiers in harm's way, so we attacked with the Israelis. Okay, so it's possible this all Netanyahu and all his machinations. Another fourth possibility is they have co-opted him. Like there's blackmail on him. There's and he has absolutely no choice but to do what he says because he's compromised in a certain way, and maybe his family is under threat. So all four are possibilities, and quite honestly, I have no idea which possibility is the most correct.
الخلاصة: تنتهي المقابلة بتأمل حزين حول فقدان الهوية الثقافية، حيث يؤكد جيانغ أن الأماكن الأكثر عداءً للحضارة الغربية الآن هي الدول الغربية نفسها.
Well, I would say Canada, Britain, Western Europe. I would say these places are the most hostile towards Western civilization. Chinese people have tremendous respect for Western civilization. In fact, in China's, in the process of promoting the classics, Plato, Homer, Shakespeare, in China, because Chinese recognize the tremendous cultural value and immense eternal truths embedded in these classics. So we're in a very weird situation where the West is destroying itself by abandoning what makes it great, which is, these classics.
I think if we talk longer, I'm going to start to cry on camera. So I'm going to take an emotional break here. Professor, thank you.
Okay.
No,
I did not mean
no.
Upset you, sorry.
I'm half kidding. No, it's emotionally resonant for me because I know that you're telling the truth and it comports with everything that I've seen. And so it's hard to accept something that's true, but I think what you're saying is true, unfortunately. So bless you for this, and I hope to see you again soon.